Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your podcast host and Kid Lit enthusiast. I'm here today with Andrew Hacket. Andrew is an educator who always dreamed of writing picture books, and now he's about to have 3 of them. And he's here to mention a little bit about all of them and dive into one specific title. So today we will talk about Ollie, the Acorn, and the Mighty Idea, Curly Locks and the 3 Hairs, and Hope and the Sea. Andrew, welcome to the Kid Lit Love podcast.
Thank you, Stephanie, for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here and get a chance to talk to you and about these 3 books that are coming out.
I am excited too. You know, I already mentioned that you are an educator. You're a 2nd grade teacher, to be exact, which we were joking before is one of the most perfect grades to teach. And you always wanted to write picture books, but you didn't until now. And now you've got a few. So I would love if you could start by sharing your journey from there to here.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I always wanted to write picture books, and I know that's something most authors will say. I've tried to track back where did this come from. The closest I can get is 5th grade. There was Crispin Allsburg has a story starter set called The Mysteries of Harris Burdick. And I just remember my teacher introducing that to us. And there's it's a picture and then a title for the story and a little blurb. And that's all there is. And there's one called The Harp, a forest scene, a river, there's a little harp. And I don't remember what my story was one bit, but I remember that it was lengthy and I received praise for it. And that is my first memory of being a writer.
Love it.
In high school, there was a creative writing class I took. I wrote a really, really terrible picture book for it. And I just have these little bits of memories dabbled throughout of these moments of having this desire, but not knowing how to approach it. Mm-hmm. At that time, the ability, all that exists on social media wasn't there. The accessibility to how to learn this craft, especially being on the young end of things, I didn't know where to go. So I took another writing class in college. It was for educational purposes. I think it was children's lit. We had to write a picture book. That was also terrible. And so I had these little moments of dabbling with it, but never really putting in the work because I didn't know how to. And then it brings us to the pandemic. Or actually, I should step back a minute. So I became an educator. I've been teaching 2nd grade for 17 years. And that has been my biggest education into being a writer. It has kept me in the mindset of children.
Yeah.
Having my own kids has helped with that as well. But the amount of picture books I have deeply investigated as part of my career choice really is what gave me that learning piece I didn't have previously, of how to structure a book, what my options are, the types of themes that are portrayed, and then who are the people that are breaking those rules? Like, where are my options to do things differently?
Yes.
Because it's great to want to accomplish something, but I've always been a person who wants to not accomplish it the best, but I want to be different. What more can I bring to something that's already existing? So then the pandemic happened. My wife is also a teacher. We had three young kids at the time. And so we made the decision that I would stay home. So I took a year off, and we quickly realized my brain is not one that can sit still. That telling my children what time to be on a computer and then just being present was not taking up the brain space that being in a classroom with 20 something kids was I was used to.
Right.
So I really seized that opportunity that summer of 2020 to really dive in. Um, Twitter at the time was a huge resource.
Yeah.
It is where I built my community of other writers, my support systems. It is how I learned so much from the kindness of other authors who are willing to raise up beginning authors and kind of just on the fly mentor us. Nothing
Yeah.
official, but just sharing their wealth of knowledge. And that's when I really dove into to trying to write. And coincidentally, Curly Locks, which we'll mention a little bit later, will be my second book out. That was the first official manuscript I wrote when I decided
Okay.
I was going to do this for real. Uh, so
Wow.
that's kind of where we got there. And then Kidlit contests online were also my introduction. Fall Writing Frenzy, put on by Caitlin Sanchez and Lydia Lukaitis, was kind of my first Kidlit go at dipping my toe into these waters. It is where I've met some of my most trusted critique partners that we were all newbies and beginners at the time that had no clue. Now, most of us are on that path to publication together at slightly varied but kind of similar trajectories, which is really amazing to have that experience together.
Yeah.
Um, and through that contest, the piece I wrote is what got me my agent, Dan Kramer. So I know we were joking before we started recording about the length of time all of this takes.
Yes.
And while I feel that way about my books, my own journey into Kidlit, I'm almost embarrassed sometimes to talk about the speed of it because I was very, very fortunate for things to line up,
Yeah.
not be stuck in the query trenches for too long. Um, and to have my debut year be three books is just my goal was to someday somehow get one book published. And if no one ever read it, I don't care. I just want it to accomplish. So it's a very surreal and I'm in a very grateful place going into this year.
2024 is going to be a good year for you, for
It's gonna
sure.
be a busy year.
And even though you didn't kind of put your head down and get to work, as you mentioned, until around 2020 and the pandemic gave you that opportunity, which is a nice way to look at the pandemic, right? As the opportunity.
Yes.
This seed was planted in fifth grade. So one might say it is a long time coming, your ideas, your trial, but thankfully, once you kind of signaled to the universe, I'm here for it, it just happened, which is a really nice surprise, right? To hear in the midst of all of these stories, like it's meant to be. And now you've got three beautiful, different, distinct, yet some really cool threads together that kind of signal kind of the style that you might have books coming out. And yeah, 2024 is going to be good to you for sure.
It is. It's going to be very busy, but I welcome it. I welcome
Yes.
the chaos and
Yes.
just the opportunity to. I have spent a career sharing other people's words and art with children, and I get to continue to do that, but I also get to do that with my own work now, and that is um, really special and something I think I didn't know how meaningful that was going to be to me, but
Mhm.
as that is on the cusp of being there, it is um, really just a tremendous gift to be able to have that opportunity. So I'm very much looking forward to it amidst the chaos that will be debuting three books.
That'll likely be the most emotional read aloud you ever read.
Yep, yep.
So why don't you give us a brief overview of all three, and then we'll jump into the one that's coming out the soonest that readers can get their hands on. So you can pick the order, but I would love for you to
Sure.
give us a little snapshot of all three of the picture books you have coming out?
Absolutely. So I think I'll save Ollie for last since we'll then jump into that a little bit more. And also, I think I didn't mention to you before, but I'll do it now. Um, so I do have a couple poems published. This past year, I was part of an anthology through the Writers Loft, which is an organization in Massachusetts. And every couple of years, they put out a poetry anthology. This year's theme was cryptids, mythical creatures, and it's called Gnomes and Unknowns, which is probably the most clever title in the world.
I love
Um,
that.
so I was very fortunate to have, I don't fancy myself a poet by any means, but I was very fortunate to have a couple of poems included within that.
Yeah.
And then the other little piece that I kind of have kept quiet, but just forgotten to share, I have a middle grade short story being published in an anthology coming out in July. It's called The Haunted States of America, and it was through SCBWI that they reached out for submissions from each state and territory in the United States, and they selected one piece to represent each state. So I get to be Mr. Massachusetts.
Wow, Mr.
Right,
Massachusetts.
right. And so that was just, both of those things are a bit out of my wheelhouse of the other books we're going to be talking about. But I think for any creatives or authors listening, it's just kind of my plea of like, take chances.
Yeah.
That I would never say middle grade horror would be what I would choose to write.
Right.
But these opportunities, they stretch our writing skills. They grow us in ways we don't know we could or need to grow. And then you just never know where those opportunities will lead you to next.
Yeah.
So those are kind of secret ones I forgot to talk about.
Oh, beautiful message. Love it.
So my second book, it's a illustrated early reader. It's called Curly Locks and the Three Hairs.
I love the title. I just got it. I just loved the title.
It is inspired by my daughter. So I have three kids, two boys and a daughter in the middle. And it follows the structure of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Except our premise is a little different, that picture day is approaching and Curly Locks is ready to quit her curls, take her hair into her own hands, and find a style that actually matches who she thinks she is. So in similarity to the original, there's some breaking and entering. That the three hairs, who are the rabbits that run the town salon, have hopped out for a bit, and Curly Locks lets herself in, and what a mess she creates. Trying to accomplish what she thinks is what she needs. And in the end, it's a story of self-acceptance. And so there's some hilarity,
There is.
a bit of absurdness, which tends to be a little bit of a theme through some of my books. She discovers that maybe that changes in what she needed after all.
Yeah.
And so yes, it was inspired. It's dedicated to my daughter, who has curly hair, and when she was younger, hated it, wanted every other style possible. So this is one where the inspiration really is close to home, and she views this as her book.
Oh,
And so that is illustrated by Jan Dolby and is out with the Little Press, coming out May 1st.
yeah. And I love, so it's funny. Like it's like an LOL book, right? I can envision this being in an LOL basket on a classroom library. Like it is just fun and it's funny. But those illustrations are just so light and fun too. Like it packs a powerful punch when you're reading it. It's such a fun experience.
Yeah, Jan did a wonderful job, and it's part of a series that I'm not the author of all of it. So it's the Modern Fairy Tale series put out by the Little Press. Will of the Werewolf is the first book in the series by Michelle McAvoy, who is also my editor for Curly Locks. And then Digital Red will be the third one coming out, I believe, in the fall, but I would have to double check that date.
Oh, fun.
And so the through thread is that it's a modern take on classic fairy tales, and Jan Dolby is illustrating all of them. And her art just couldn't be a more perfect fit for what these stories are. So very, very fortunate to be paired with her.
I agree. Oh, wonderful. Okay, what's up next?
So then the third book will be coming out in May 28th. And it, in many ways, is sort of a book that feels most special to me. It's hard to say they're all my babies. It's like choosing my favorite child. Um, it's called Hope in the Sea. It's illustrated by Radivoeva, and it is out with Worthy Kids. And it is a story of a girl named Hope who finds herself at the beach, kind of in her feelings. Um, it doesn't specify exactly what's going on, leaves it open for the reader a bit, but feeling lonely, kind of in that space where, I'm grumpy and I don't want to be helped. I want to be grumpy. Um, and surprisingly, unbeknownst to her, an unexpected friend comes along in the form of C, where we have some personification and some interaction with C as the character that really helps her come out of these big feelings she's having. And it is my first book that'll be coming out that really uses my lyrical language. Um, it's quieter. I try to match the rhythm of the ocean with the sentence lengths and really just kind of infuse it with this feeling of the ocean that I grew up in Rhode Island. Going to the beach is a part of my life. I probably have the same connection to the ocean as Hope does. Um, and so through the story and through the friendship of C, she's able to um, feel accepted, find friendship there, and a sense of belonging. And I think as we talk more, we'll see that's really a common thread throughout my books is this sense of belonging and this sense of being comfortable in who you are. Um, so that story comes out May 28th. It is beautifully illustrated in this watercolor style that just so fits what this book is and what it represents. So I'm really excited for that and hopefully to plan myself a little beach book tour as an excuse to just
Well, heck
travel this
yeah.
summer.
Yeah, and I mentioned before we began, I loved all three, but there was something about this one that just spoke right to my heart. I loved it. The words were beautiful, the illustrations were beautiful, they came together. But I think also for me, when I read books, this podcast is a children's literature podcast. So obviously adults are listening for the children in their lives. But I truly believe that adults need to read children's literature to their own inner child. And
Yes.
Hope was my inner child. Hope was me at one point or another, in my childhood. Good gosh, the teenage years and even adulthood, right? We have those moments where we just don't feel great. We don't feel good. We're a little cranky. We feel a little alone. And instead of sitting in it, she did something. And she did something for her that was just because she enjoyed it and have fun. And lo and behold, the world shifted around her because Hope shifted. And I thought, oh my gosh, every adult needs this picture book as much as every child does. So I can't wait. I love the other ones, but boy, May 28th, I'm looking forward to.
Well, I think what you're saying too about that inner child within the adults reading, um, often as writers we're told to write from that kid perspective to bring it down to that child perspective so they can understand. Um, and while I do think I do that somewhat, when I look at the body of work I'm creating, so much of it is from my adult perspective of maybe unresolved childhood stuff, right?
Yeah,
But it's speaking to me now, but maybe to these parts that I felt, or also as adults. And I think kids have this perspective that's a little faulty sometimes that adults have it all together,
yeah,
right? Because we're older and because we're the ones in charge of making decisions, that everything's great. And I know for me as a teacher, I try to model the opposite of that as much as possible because it's almost it's doing a disservice to the kids for them to grow up thinking that when you're an adult, you have to have it all together.
right,
Because so often we don't.
right.
And they
Yeah,
need to know that
so
we
true.
deal with those mix of feelings and that's okay.
Yeah,
Right. I think a lot of my books are about that feeling of whatever you're feeling inside, that is okay.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And we can be with it all, no matter
yep.
what it is.
And sometimes we just have to sit with it a little bit. It doesn't
Yes.
always have to be fixed.
Yeah. Oh,
So.
oh, May 28th. I'll be able to hold that one. But now let's come to the one that is actually coming out the soonest, the one we can get our hands on the fastest, which is all about Ollie. So why don't you take it away for that?
Yes. Oh, yes. So, Ollie the Acorn and the Mighty Idea, um, possibly the longest title ever. Um, it is um, the story that most represents probably who I am as a teacher, how I want to engage with children, and that is through humor, being a bit absurd. Um, and what we were just speaking about, that speaking kind of to your inner child, that really is encompassed for me a lot in this story. So, in Ollie the Acorn and the Mighty Idea, Kaz Witness is the illustrator. I cannot say I could spend a whole episode talking about Kaz. She is phenomenal.
Oh, they're
Um,
beautiful illustrations. Yeah,
yep.
again, they match so perfectly with the message of your words.
Oh, yeah. It couldn't have been a better partnership. And she herself is author illustrator of a number of books that are all absolutely phenomenal. So anyone listening should go look her up and check out all those books. Um, so Ollie follows the story of Ollie Alexander Kanderstein, a boy whose name is bigger than he is. And he is this smaller stature child, has a knack for gardening, um, kind of adding to his quirkiness as a character of not a typical childhood interest. And all he wants, what he wants most of all, is to be big and mighty like an oak tree in order to deal with the bully next door, Everett. Um, and he thinks he couldn't, and he shouldn't. But one day, an acorn hits him on the head, and he gets the idea that, maybe I could become a tree. Um, and so it then goes into a little bit of old lady who swallowed a fly type structure,
Yes, I loved it. I
a
loved
cause and
it.
effect. In my former teaching days, I was heavily involved in science education at the youngest levels. So it wasn't my initial plan to put any sort of STEM element in there. It's what the story called for. And
Mhm.
so we go through this kind of cause and effect, building in level of absurdity of the actions that Ollie takes in order to accomplish this transformation. Some would say a tremendous transformation,
Oh, I
um,
love it.
where he is able to be what he thinks is mighty, and that is being larger than others. Um, he then makes some choices he's not too pleased with himself about after, in order to get back at his bully. So there's so much in this story. And I was thinking about it before we jumped on the call of um, where some of this came from, not inspiration necessarily, but when I think about it with my teacher hat on, right? Budgets for teacher are super low. So every teacher's not running out and buying new picture books. We just can't. Um, Time for teachers, super low.
Yeah.
And so I know that if I'm bringing a new book into my classroom and infusing it into my instruction, it has to be hitting on so many levels. So for me, what Ollie does, first and foremost, in my opinion, it will be a most phenomenal read aloud. If you cannot have fun and your students can't have fun with this is the book. Um,
It really is. It really, really is, everyone. It's the book to have fun with.
it's and so then we have some science in it as well, with the life cycle of plants and trees and what they need to grow. There's SEL themes in there that can be brought into lessons for those pieces. Themes of kindness, friendship, bullying, conflict resolution. That I didn't set out to do that, but when it all came together, that is the what came about, and I just can't wait to share this with students.
Yeah.
Um, I can't wait for them to join in with the refrains and calling back and yelling out predictions, and
Yes.
what I hope will be the gasps of surprise on certain page turns
Yes.
of just really helping them get lost in a world of imagination. That what happens in this book is absurd and fantastical, and that's what I think childhood should be. And so often that little bit we're chipping away at kids earlier and earlier. So if Ollie can bring some of that into a classroom for a little bit longer, my day would be made.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and he will. As I was reading it and I was imagining reading it to a group of students. And this is the hard part because you don't want to give away spoilers because I don't want to say what happens because you need to see it. You need to experience and see it for yourself. But I could just picture a bunch of kids on the rug leaning in so far to get closer to the pages, the oohs, the ahs, the oh my gosh, what is he doing? The like holding on to your stomach and like, wait a minute. I could just picture it. And this is a book that is truly, I think, going to capture students. So my favorite book when I was a kid was The Monster at the End of This Book. You know that
I
Grover
do.
speaks right to you, right? And so I grew up expecting books to have this very personal effect. Like Grover was talking to me, and that must be what characters do. And I could see kids feeling, even though Ollie may not be talking directly to the reader, there's stuff happening where kids are going to be in it. And as an adult, I was just so delighted with what was happening. And again, I can't spoil it, but what really made my day too is at the end, you give this little disclaimer piece about what happened. And I thought that was like the icing on the cake that just made the whole thing come together so perfectly.
It is very hard because I appreciate and I understand like not trying to give away too
Right,
much.
right. Because
It's
they need to go get
really
it and see it.
it's really hard to talk about this book without some
Yes.
of it. I think it is fair to say as we talk about the absurdity that as things progress, Ollie ingests different items, starting with an acorn, thinking if I eat this acorn, I'll grow into a tree. And that brings in our kind of playful refrain of um, it starts with I couldn't, I shouldn't, but I did,
Yep.
which kids are just going to be jumping at, I hope.
Yes.
And then there's a second refrain after he eats the acorn of um, he waited, he wondered, he rumbled, and then there's a burp, and each time it's increasing in size. And how I'm going to pull that off in a read aloud, I have not figured out.
I didn't even think of that yet.
Right? Yeah. Um, and so bringing the humor for kids, bringing in some refrains to get that interactivity that you're kind of speaking about, even though Ollie himself is not a first person narrator. Um, and it doesn't work. And so then he thinks, what else does a seed need? And he goes through water and soil, each time becoming more and more ridiculous. So this was a conversation my editor, Kayla Tostevin at Page Street, I have to just pause for a second and say, she's incredible. This book would not exist without her commitment to it, her fighting for it. She understood these two boys from the first time she laid eyes on the manuscript, when many others did not. And it went through several R&Rs in order to get it made. But her commitment, I truly feel this book would have, died at the publisher long ago if I did not have her as an advocate for it. So I'm forever grateful that she is the reason that I will initially be a published author. But one of our concerns was, this is for young children. Are we setting them up to make really bad choices at home? And I know for myself, I love to be sarcastic and silly with kids, and I understand why I'm doing it. Those students understand me. We have this common understanding where we can do that in a safe environment, right? Not every family, not every teacher, not every grown up who is sharing a book um, shares that same sentiment, maybe, or has that relationship with who they're reading with. So we included back matter, and never in my life did I think to put back matter into a fiction picture book, especially a silly, humorous, ridiculous one. Um, so at the end, we do have a small section of back matter called Digesting Ollie's Eating Antics.
Yes.
And it just goes through each thing he eats with that disclaimer of like, he does this, you know, but you couldn't and you shouldn't, kind of bringing back the language from the story. And it just lays in a few interesting facts about each of those things that he ingested. What was really fun for me was the voice I was able to use for it, because I think nonfiction back matter, I think dry, just factual. Um, and they allowed me to have such a playful banter in there to kind of keep it quick,
Yeah.
keep the humor of the story, but also drop in some nonfiction facts for
Yeah.
students that want that.
Yeah. That opening clip before you go into it was just, it was,
Yeah.
I was laughing. I was like, fun. This is so much fun. I
And
love that edition.
it's one of those things where, I think first draft of this story was probably written somewhere in 2020. So like years of revising and working on it bit by bit. The back matter was pretty close to a one take on
Yeah.
it. It was just like, let's just, I think because it wasn't part of the original story,
Mhm.
I didn't have my revising hat on. That I can be a bit of a get in my own way. Letting thoughts flow freely onto the page of a first draft is super hard for me. I
Yeah.
want to fix everything, and
Yeah.
uh, because I didn't really know where the back matter was going, I just released the need for perfection and just had fun with it.
Yep.
And I hopefully that shows, and hopefully kids will get a kick out of it. And again, I keep going back to putting my teacher hat on. Um, as an educator, if that can inspire students to write some back matter in their own creative writing times, I think it's just wonderful to show kids the options. So frequently we they think that what we say is the end all be all of how to do something correct.
Mhm.
And what I really strive for, and I hope others teachers will strive for, is instead of showing them the correct way, show them the possibilities so they can find their correct way.
Yeah.
Because we all want innovators. We want all these realms of life to continue to grow and change and offer us things that we haven't seen before. And that really starts in the classroom, in my opinion, of showing students that they have their own creative mind and that they can create things that don't yet exist, that there isn't a model for what success has to look like, but there's some steps to help you make progress forward and then infuse what you're passionate about.
I love it. And it ties to what you talked about very early when you were introducing yourself, is you like to do things a little bit your own way. You want to infuse that. And yeah, I could see, I seem to be talking about book bins in a classroom library today, but I could see a new bin of a
Mhm.
new kind of mentor text for a writing technique that kids could try, which is that back matter in a fiction text. It was such it was an unexpected and delightful addition to come at the end of the book. And I love now thinking about that really could inspire students to step out on their own path with that too.
Yeah, and I think even there's so much more, not necessarily my books, but there's so much more being offered now in terms of what nonfiction is.
Yes.
That when I was a student, we were reading very dry, factual
Hmm.
books with heading,
Yeah.
narrative paragraphs about the factual matter. And now there's just so much for kids to be excited about that I don't gravitate towards nonfiction, but I think a lot of it was my exposure to nonfiction when I was younger. It wasn't anything that excited me compared to the journeys I could go on through a fiction story.
Yeah.
So I really think a ton of growth has been made, and what's being put out currently in that nonfiction field just has so much to offer for kids for their excitement and to inspire them in their own writing adventures.
Yeah. I agree. Now, I know earlier I talked about, you have three different books coming out, and they are three different distinct books. There's a different voice, there's a different style, a different tone to all of them. But there are also some through threads in there of, as you mentioned, of belonging, of being comfortable with who you are. What is your hope for your books, that kids will walk away from your books with fill in the blank?
Yeah. Um, I think for me, I hope kids will walk away with from these um, feeling seen
Mm.
at an emotional level. Um, the stories themselves, or two out of the three of them, aren't leaning too heavily into the emotions, but there are those threads. And it alludes to what we talked about earlier, kind of with the way kids look to grown-ups. But I think also for many students, at some point, something changes, right? When they're young, they express all their emotions so freely, anywhere, anytime, inconvenient times.
Yes, without a filter.
Exactly. And then somehow through being in these larger groups of being at school, for some reason that starts to get tempered of this feeling of needing to hide some of those feelings that are not happy. And so what I really hope through these books is that students can see that that isn't necessary, that it is okay to be like Ollie and feel overwhelmed and angry and make a mistake that you thought you were doing something correct,
Mhm.
but that we can step back from that and set things right again. Or in Curly Locks, that's really self-imposed peer pressure for Curly Locks, that she wants to look like the other kids. And whether a student feels that way about their physical appearance, or maybe it's their perception, because we all know, especially young kids, it's all egocentric and on them, that someone has something more than them, or their family does this, but our family doesn't, so they're better than us. There's so much
Mhm.
self-imposed doubt and worry, um, that if through Curly Locks that can help them see, like, we can just accept this about ourselves, or start to just lay the groundwork of it. And then in Hope, having those feelings of loneliness, but her name's Hope for a reason.
Yes.
Finding hope in what is special to you and trusting in that. um, I think all three of them really come down to being your authentic self,
Mhm.
and that's something that kids are often too young to think deeply about, but we can lay the groundwork through the stories we read. And I think it's something a lot of adults still struggle with. Um, and so if any of that can be gleaned from my books for the students or for adults, then I'm extremely happy. And if nothing else, if they can giggle and enjoy time with a grown up through it, then
Yeah.
what more can we expect from a picture
Yeah.
book, right?
Absolutely. Well, I know they're going to get both. I did. I did, and I know the rest of the readers will too. And I can't wait to see them come out into the world, some a little sooner than others.
Yep,
But all in good time. We have to be patient readers as we wait for it. But where can listeners find more about you, find your books, all the things?
absolutely. So across all social media, I'm at Andrew C. Hackett. Um, and I try to have a fair bit of a presence, but most of it is just helping spread the word about other fabulous work my fellow creative friends are doing, um, and also keeping people up to date on what the latest is happening with my books and my writing. My website, andrewhackett.com, is kind of the one-stop shop for all the things. So information about my books, ordering links, my local independent bookseller, Tidepool Press, sorry, Tidepool Bookshop, is where we'll be offering signed copies if anyone wants them. Otherwise, I urge people to go to their local indies. If you need to go somewhere else, I understand and I still appreciate it. um, and then also at the website, there will be just information about me, where I'll be visiting to talk about my books, also opportunities for author visits coming up that I will be taking a little time this spring with all three books coming out, where I'll be doing virtual and in-person visits. So if anyone's interested, um, it's probably one of the things I'm most excited about, to mesh my two professional worlds together, of getting to present my creative work through my teacher lens and getting to work with students, um, on these workshops I've developed that hit on the themes of my books, but across different grade levels and schools, hopefully everywhere. So all that information is there on the website.
Awesome. I'm so excited for you. Again, 2024 is just going to feel kind of magical with all of this wonderfulness coming out into the world. I so appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and listeners and just being part of your launch into the picture book world.
I appreciate it so much. I know all of us authors, we depend on our podcasters and bloggers to help us spread the word. So we couldn't do this without the help of all of you. So I appreciate you taking the time and having me and getting to talk books. What could be a better way to spend the morning?
I know, exactly. I always say, I think authors have like the best job, but my job of just sharing them with every teacher and student I meet is number 2. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much. And thank you for listening, everyone. I'll see you inside the next episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of kid lit love. Thanks for listening.